Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. This is the first lecture in communicative language teaching, a short introduction to the communicative language teaching. And communicative approach teaching began in Britain in 60s as a replacement of the structural method, and it's called situational language teaching. Okay, so it's communicative language teaching or situational language teaching come to replace the structural method that focus on the structure. So this method focus on what? On the situational language teaching. That means to use language in different situation, how to use language in different situation. It was a response to Chomsky's criticism in the mid of 60s of the structural theories of language. Okay, so it's come as a response to Chomsky's criticism of the old methods that based on the structural theories of language. The British applied linguists began to question the theoretical assumption underlying situational language teaching and start to use it or to make it replace the old methods. So they see that communicative proficiency is more important than mastery of structure. That means to be able to communicate is more important to master the structure of the language. And they began to put the language in its social context. After 60s, support from different disciplines come to support this method. So there is a support from functional linguists, for example, John Firth and Halliday from sociolinguistics, Himes and Gambers from philosophy, Austin and Searle. So the theoretical background of communicative language teaching is rooted in the different discipline or different dimensions of the life. For example, in the linguistics, in sociolinguistics, and in philosophy. Communicative language teaching is not a single method. It's a broad approach supported by many different theoretical principles because it's, as we said, it's principles taken from different disciplines. So it's a broad approach. Therefore, it provides their teacher or language teacher with different ideas, different method, different activities they can use in their class. I mean, the class will have different activities, different ideas, different method that the teacher can use to make his class active and make students learn the language quickly. CLT focuses on meaningful communication. The actual language use is emphasized over the grammatically correct language usage. The use of the language is more important than mastering the structural of grammar or paradigms. In this approach, students are given tasks to achieve or to accomplish using language instead of studying or learning the language. So students accomplish their task or participate in the activities by using the language, and not here they use the language and instead of studying or learning the language in order to use it later on. The syllabus is the functional syllabus or the functional development syllabus. Okay, for example, use the language to asking for permission or asking for direction or giving directions. What about the structural point? For example, the tenses, the conditional, reported speech, etc. are not part of or are not the basis of the syllabus of the communicative language teaching, because the syllabus focuses on the functional use of the language. Use the language to achieve function like asking for permission, asking for direction, and giving direction. Communicative language teaching is an innovative approach that seeks to overcome all the limitation of the other methods. All the other methods we have studied have limitation, so this method used or come to overcomes all the other methods limitations. So the functional syllabus is the main syllabus used, and it's replaces the structural syllabus. There is less emphasis on error correction in this method. Why? Because fluency and communication is more important than accuracy. Okay, here than and not that. More important than accuracy. Okay, classes are more student-centered. Okay, student-centered. For students accomplish their task in cooperation and interaction with the other students. Okay, because they work in group, the teacher will divide the class into small groups of 4 or 5 students, and they work together, so they achieve their task by cooperating and interaction in the target language with other students. What is the role of the teacher? The teacher is observer and advisor. He helps students initiate, for example, interaction or communication, create tasks and activities in the class. Important keynotes. One of these central ideas is that one does not learn a language to use it. Rather, one uses the language in order to use it. Okay, so this is a very important point, that students should use the language in order to learn it, not learn the language in order to use it. A language is a social phenomena. It's not individualized. That means learning a language should not be based on individual activity. Only one person work individually, read and memorize and do these things to be able to communicate in the language, in the target language. Rather, it is a social phenomenon. That means you have to communicate with others, you have to cooperate with others, interact with others to be able to learn the language and to use it correctly. Accordingly, language learners should learn not only the correct form, but also the appropriate use of the language. So we know, for example, this is a correct form, but maybe it's not an appropriate form. So the language learners here in this method, they should learn not only the correct form, it's correct sentences or correct word to be used, but it's not an appropriate one. So in addition to know the correct form, they have to know what is the appropriate use of the language, and this will be discussed in the experience, inshallah. Language is a tool that we use to perform a set of functions in meaningful social settings. So language, we use it to achieve function in social settings. For example, as we said, asking for permission, or asking for direction, or giving direction, or do other things. The major goal of language teaching is not the development of linguistic competence, but the development of communicative language proficiency. The most important thing is to develop communicative language proficiency, to be proficient, to be able to communicate, to be able to interact, to be able to use the language, not only to master the structure of the language or the grammatical paradigm, the grammatical patterns and these things. The most important thing is to be able to communicate or to develop communicative language proficiency. The summary for this lecture: in the 70s, educators began to question if they were going about meeting the goal in the right way. Some observed that students could produce sentences accurately in the lesson, but could not use them appropriately when genuinely communicating outside the classroom. Students be able to communicate or be able to use or to produce correct sentences in the classroom, but they cannot use the language outside the classroom. It's difficult, they cannot. So this is encourage scholars to develop the communicative language teaching. Others noted that being able to communicate requires more than meeting or mastering linguistic structure. Other scholars found that to be able to communicate in the target language, you have to master or require more than mastering linguistic structure. Now we can write, or many students can write, correct sentences grammatically, but they cannot communicate in the target language. So this is the problem, that we can write, we can master the grammatical, we know the structure, the paradigms, the different pattern, the different form of the language, but we cannot communicate in the target language. Due to the fact that language was fundamentally social, so within a social context, language users need to perform certain function. They have to use the language to achieve different function, to be able to communicate, to interact, to use the language, or to use the language orally. Students may know the role of linguistic usage, but be enabled to use the language communicative. Okay, they know the role, they know the grammatical rules, okay, the different form and patterns of the language, but they cannot produce the language. In short, being able to communicate requires more than linguistic competence. If you want to communicate in the target language, to be able to interact with others correctly and proficiently, you have to be able or to master than the linguistic competence. It requires what? Communicative competence. So students, when they master or they have to work on the communicative competence rather than linguistic competence. Okay, linguistic competence is it's also important, but the most important thing is the communicative competence, to be able to communicate. Communicative language teaching CLT aim proudly to make communicative competence the goal of language teaching. So the goal of language teaching, the most important thing in the language teaching, is to communicate or to use the use the target language inside the classroom. Clapper 2003 makes the point that because CLT lacks closely prescribed classroom techniques, okay, is compared with some of the other methods, we have just asked at CLT is fuzzy. It's also an important point that CLT was described as fuzzy method. Why fuzzy? This fuzziness has given CLT a flexibility. It's important for CLT to be flexible, which has allowed it to endure, to continue for 30 years, and its flexibility also means that classroom practices differ widely. That means the teacher can have different ideas, or they have different ideas, different thoughts, different methods, and different technique can be used in the class to help students or help teacher to create situations, create activities that help students to learn the target language. So fuzziness is come from the different or the background, the theoretical background of the CLT that, as we said, depend on different discipline. Okay, and this make it differ widely. Okay, متنوعة, that the teacher can create different situation, different activities that help students to communicate in the target language. This is the introduction of the CLT, and inshallah next lecture we are talking about theories or the background theories that backed or supported this method, and it's now seen as the most important method used in school and in intermediate and high schools and the universities to help students to be able to communicate in the target language instead of learning the target language without using it. Okay, thank you for today.